Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to listen to our Nepal abroad experience. I'm going to wait until the slides. Throughout this presentation, we tried summarizing all the amazing experience that we had during our month in Nepal and all the things we learned, so we hope you enjoyed. And first, we're gonna introduce ourselves in the group. My name is Adriana.
Hi everyone, my name is Medara.
Hi, I'm Emma.
I'm Micah.
I'm Riley.
And I'm Avery. And these are our seniors that graduated in the spring, Amelie, Marshall, and Dylan. And these are our broad leaders. We have Dr. Nicholas Johnson, who taught topics in sustainability, climate justice, Dane Carlson, who taught drawing complexity and change, and Jenna Fisher, who was our resident counselor.
That was a brief video that we put together to show you some clips from every day while we were in Nepal.
Go back a slide. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Okay, so in Nepal, we had the opportunity to learn impacts and adaptations about the climate crisis within Nepal and Mustang. We were immersed in the landscape and architecture, the different cultures and religions, as well as we got to hear different knowledge that was shared from the people there. We saw the importance of connections between the people and lands and learned how climate crisis is ultimately intertwined within everything and anything.
So we spent a whole semester in the spring studying Nepal's culture and issues regarding climate change, but it wasn't there until we were there in person talking to the locals and seeing the land for ourselves did we truly begin to comprehend what it was like.
And during the abroad, a couple items kept getting misplaced. one being Dane's hat and the other being Madara's water bottle. So there are 3 photos where Madara's water is photoshopped in, and they're a little difficult, so if you want to find them, you can.
Please help me find my water bottle.
The layout of our itinerary was very intentional. We started and ended our abroad in the same cities and places. And we visited each location twice, which helped us to reconnect to a place we had already been to, which was really amazing for all of us. And then during the middle of our abroad, we did a longer homestay and a week-long trek.
So, May 2024, we packed around 2 pairs of pants, 5 t-shirts, our hiking boots and socks, and we headed to Nepal. After 2 days of travel, we finally arrived in Kathmandu, which is the capital of Nepal. In Kathmandu, we were there for around 2 days, and we were able to visit different places, such as the Buddhanath, which is one of the biggest spherical stupas in the world. There, we got to see things such as mandalas. The picture you see here, it's a sand mandala, which was made there. And actually, fun fact, it has to be destroyed right away. But we also saw painters and people painting mandalas. And we saw the artists in the process, which was interesting. We also visited the Swayambhu temple, which is to your right. And it is also known as the monkey temple because of the amount of monkeys that are walking around, which was a fun experience. And in that temple, we started practicing our drawing skills and observation by walking and observing different things that you usually don't see whenever you're just taking pictures.
After exploring Kathmandu for 2 days, we traveled down to Pokhara. It took us about 6 hours by road, and we got there in the evening. Pokhara is Nepal's second largest city. It's surrounded with lots of beautiful hills and lakes. In Pokhara, we enjoyed taking evening walks along the lake. We also enjoyed having meals out together. We enjoyed exploring the city and also getting to shop in the different shops available. In Pokhara, we explored how the government in Nepal is very distant from either rural citizens or citizens that are low caste or citizens that do not have so much power. And that also tied into their identity. We discovered that who you are in Nepal mattered, depending on, and it influenced how you were going to adapt to climate change or not. If you were a Tibetan herder, it's different from being a poor Tibetan herder in the rural area and a high government official in the city. We also explored how there was a conflict between man-made systems in Nepal and nature in Nepal. For example, the drainage system was built too small, and Nepal has very heavy monsoon rains, which means that when the monsoon rains fell, the drainage was not sufficient to catch the amount of water flowing, which resulted in flooding. Drawing was a big thing in our abroad. We had a class called Drawing for Complexity and Change, taught by Dan Carlson, and we drew a lot almost every day based on prompts we were given. On this particular day, we were given a prompt to explore how nature and man-made systems are in conflict with each other in Pokhara. And this drawing allowed us to observe the landscape more closely. It also allowed us to observe how each of us saw things. We were given the same prompts, but we brought out very different drawings, and we focused on very different things, which allowed us to learn how each of us saw the world.
Also in Pokhara, we had the amazing opportunity to play and connect with the local school, and we played with their girls soccer team, which was super fun because it was soccer. But also, it also taught us that language is... Yeah, it's the video. So that experience, it was super short. It was just one day, but it taught us that language is not the only way to connect with people, but that things, in this case, such as soccer or a game or drawings or just plenty of things can make you connect with someone other than just the language.
We then drove using Jeeps for 6 hours from Pokhara to Marfa, and there was a big difference between these two places because Pokhara is Nepal's tourist capital, and Marfa is a small village in Mustang, and they're known for a lot of their Buddhist monasteries and for growing apples, and it's a popular place to go before trekkers go on the Annapurna circuit. And there was big differences between these two places landscape-wise, and so in Pokhara, you're in the Midlands, and there's rolling hills, and you can see terraced villages right by the lake, so it's a lot easier to grow things, to build roads, and in Marfa, because it's so much more remote, it's much more difficult. It wasn't uncommon for us to come across herds as we were driving, and we also got to see many different stages of road development, and a lot of the roads we were on were unpaved, but there were also some that were paved and then in the process of construction, and so we got to see the different benefits and drawbacks that development has on a nation.
So with the unpaved roads, it was really nice to have like a couple breaks. And so, for example, the photo to the right is where we stopped for lunch to have dal bhat. And dal bhat is a staple food in Nepal that we ate basically every single day. It has rice and lentils, and then for the most part, we had it with vegetables that were cooked. And then we also, at one point, stopped again for a tea break where we had something called cow butter tea, and cow butter tea is basically just butter and salt in the, yeah. And then this video is kind of just to present how unpaved and bumpy the actual route was.
While we were in Marfa, we got to see one example of the remnants of a landslide right here. And something we learned about and talked about frequently in Nepal is that the land is very loud there. That was a quote from a book we studied, and we saw that and read about that a lot. There's lots of erosion. The land is always moving, and so then the landscape is always changing, and people have to adapt to the changes in those landscapes from a year-to-year basis. And while we were trekking, actually, at one of the campsites, we heard this really loud rumbling noise, and it sounded like thunder, and there was a rockfall or a landslide across the river that we got to witness, which was really interesting. And then on the right here, you'll see a photo of a home that has been cut in half because the government used eminent domain to take away part of this home in order to pave the road. And then also in Marfa, you'll see the main street we walked through, and there were also lots of Buddhist monasteries and young monks in training there. And then we got to witness what Tibetan architecture looks like for homes, and so they all have flat roofs, and this allows people to store firewood on top and to dry clothes. And then the homes share exterior walls too, and so this saves on resources. So in more remote places, that helps them, and then it also saves on energy and is a more energy efficient way to heat homes.
So this is a drawing I did right outside of Marfa in a Tibetan refugee settlement. It was a house that was positioned up against a river ledge, and due to previous year's floods, that river ledge collapsed, and it caused half of the house to essentially sink into the river. And I chose to draw this because of the impact it has on the people who do not necessarily have rights to the land that they're built on, nor the financial need or the financial capability to rebuild or build somewhere else. And then from Marfa, we made our way to Lubra, which would be our main study location and focus of the abroad.
So this is a video of us crossing a suspension bridge for the first time, which is very common in Nepal. It connects mountains. Instead of having them go down to the riverbed, it's easier to just cross the bridge. And in the video, you'll see it looks something easy and just fun to walk around. But in reality, the altitude of the bridges were very high, which was something new for a lot of us. And also sometimes it was very windy, which made it a little bit scary. But overall, it was an interesting experience.
Okay, so for some background information on Lubra, Lubra is a very small village in the region of Mustang and Nepal in general. It's made up of about 14 households and is over 800 years old. So why did we choose Lubra as our main focus of this abroad? Well, our professor, Dan Carlson, has had previous experiences conducting research in that village and the region, as well as Yungjung, who is an expert in migration and climate change in the region of Mustang. And Yungjung acted as our guide of the region, and he answered countless questions for us and interpreted the language for us as well. So some of the climate change adaptations that we witnessed firsthand in Lubra was the vertical development. Lubra is essentially built on a mountain, so it's very, very vertically integrated from their housing to their fields to the grazing lands where they keep their goats and sheep. But because of the changing landscape, it's forced them to continuously build housing above the original village and terraced fields. Additionally, outmigration is a big problem that Lubra is facing. A lot of the households are sending their kids abroad for education, and they form a new life there and end up not coming back to the village. It was actually very rare for us to see someone close in age to us, as most of the people in the village and the region are 50 plus years old. Apple trees as well. Due to climate change, it is much easier for these villages and Lubra to grow apples in higher elevation. This, combined with the road development that has happened in the previous years, has created a shift in the agriculture of the village, shifting from the traditional buckwheat and barley to apple trees because they sell for more. And finally, the gabion walls, which is essentially a collection of rocks sewn together with chicken wire to prevent erosion and floods. But the gabion walls are a very short-term solution to a long-term problem. And then here's a little goat break. Like I said, the goats and sheep herds are a really big component of the village's livelihood. One of our first days in Lubra, we spent the day hiking up to the grazing lands where the village keeps the herds, and along the way we stopped to see, pet, and hold the baby goats. That was just a little short video of Yungjung messing with one of the goats.
Another day within Lubra, we ended up actually splitting up into groups and helping families. This video is a time lapse of one of the groups tilling or tossing dirt to open up water channels to better distribute the water for the crops. This was a very fun experience. We all enjoyed it, and it was also a very important experience because it allowed for us to kind of put ourselves in their shoes and see just how much work they put into and how much care they have to put into their community and to their crops, because for them, that's their day-to-day source resources for food and income. And so for them, that's a more direct path of food and income in comparison to us in our day-to-day, where we have the concourse, so we have stores where we just buy our food. And so helped us to understand how direct the impacts and effects of climate crisis is for them.
Also, another day in Lubra, we had the assignment to go down to the riverbed, which gave us a better perspective of the whole village and where the houses were. And we divided into 3 groups, and we drew an elevation of the village. And it was interesting to do this assignment because first, a lot of people chose different drawing methods. We're used to just drawing with a pen or a pencil. And in this case, we were using the dirt from the riverbed. Some people were using rocks to make some texture. And overall, the 3 groups had different outcomes of the drawing. And then we realized that we were living in the same place, which was Lubra, but we all had different perspectives of what we were seeing. And the drawings allowed us to see those differences.
This is one drawing I did while standing on the riverbed in Lubra. It's a continuous line drawing, and it shows it's a section cut. So if you were to split this terraced field vertically, it shows the different layers. And I wanted to draw this perspective so that you could see the different height comparisons between the ground level with where the riverbed has risen to compared to the terraced fields. And the ground right now is at the level of half the height of an apple tree. And so these fields are currently half buried, and they're still producing apples miraculously, even though the trunks are completely buried in heavy river sediment that settles when the monsoon seasons come. And you can see a makeshift fence over here that is supposed to keep out livestock and more sediment from harming their fields. And then you can also see the terraced fields up above of wheat and barley, and in the coming years, those 2 will likely be buried.
And then going into the friction that we witnessed in Lubra, friction was a term we used a lot in Nepal to describe the conflict between nature and human development and so one of the frictions that we saw was the changing landscape. Year after year, during the monsoon season, the rain washes sedimentation down from the mountains into the riverbed, and this has eventually caused it to pile up year over year. And when it dries like concrete, and it's pretty much impossible to move. So and it's not something that the village has been faced with over its past 800 years. It's a new crisis that's happening. So we also went to Lubra to look at this. And then the vertical development is also another friction. Because they're building on a mountainside above previously built structures, it can cause landslides and damage what is below it, including their agricultural fields. The relocation of the village is another example of friction. It's something that we covered prior and while in Lubra, and it's much easier said than done. Like the communities facing climate crisis, they need to move, but they have religious and cultural ties to the land dating back centuries, as well as it's not financially possible, nor do they have the property rights and regulations to do so. So one example of this is one of the homestays we actually stayed in didn't have the permits to build where they were built.
So while we're in Lubra, we stayed in 2 guest houses. So the women stayed with a woman named Young Chen, who is the sister-in-law of Young Zheng, who I mentioned before. And the men lived down the road in Paul Sung's guest house. And this is where we had our classroom and we all had our meals. And it was also a place where we learned more about the practice culture of Nepal, and it helped us understand the different human experiences. We were taught to make masala chai and to make momos, which are dumplings. And this is where we practiced our Nepali and learned more useful phrases. And we also saw how individual households were trying to adapt to climate crisis. As Riley talked about before, Young Chen's house is actually illegally built. Because of that flooding, she had to move into government land. So here are a few of our favorite phrases. Excuse my pronunciation. Namaste means hello or goodbye. Tapayako nam keho is what is your name. So mero nam Avery ho is my name is Avery. Danyabad, which means thank you. Tatopani, which means hot water, which is really useful because we had to boil over water for it to be safe. And Pugyo, which means I'm full.
One of the mornings, we hiked for an hour outside of Lubra to the Pandacola River. And it was amazing because we were here when it wasn't the monsoon season, so it was just what looked like a little creek. And we could only imagine how big the river becomes based on what we could see. And this bridge and road was built in just 2017, but in the next few years, it is going to be wiped away by the really heavy sediment that is starting to pile up right by the river and right by the bridge.
So this is one of my favorite drawings from the entire abroad. This is a drawing of a community building in Lubra, and the building had its roof blown off because it was built with a sloping roof rather than a flat roof, which is the Tibetan roof style, as Emma mentioned earlier. So what happened was that decades ago, this building was built by an NGO, and then the strong winds of the area blew the roof off. So what I learned from this drawing and why I chose to draw this building was because we learned a lot about how climate adaptation is taking place across Nepal, and NGOs are building a lot of projects and structures, but we learned that a lot of these structures are not built with local knowledge and with the participation of indigenous people. So this building kind of served as a stark reminder to me of what happens if you do not build with local and indigenous knowledge and expertise.
So Marfa, which Emma talked about, and Lubra, which we just talked about, were the two villages that we visited at first, but that was only the start of our trekking experience. And on this next slide, it's a small visual of our trekking part of the abroad. We visited around 10 villages. In some of them, we did homestay at tea houses or guest houses. Some of them we walked by and learn about their context and history and a little bit more specifically about what they were going through. And I know here it looks kind of small, but we did hike all of this throughout like a week. It was a lot. I'm just gonna leave it there. But it was due to time and the uniqueness of every single village. We're not gonna go into details about every single village, but if you guys have any questions after, we're more than happy to answer.
And so one of our last days in Lubra, we had breakfast, and then with the help of the Three Sisters who brought along horses, the Three Sisters is the trekking organization that we worked with us to pretty much carry us up the mountain, it felt like at sometimes. But we started bright and early, and we trekked pretty much straight up for the first 4 hours where we had lunch, which was also provided by the Three Sisters organization. But while we're eating lunch and hiking, Nikki, one of the owners, and Indra, one of the guides, would go ahead and kind of scout the trails to make sure they were safe, because the landscape is always changing. We need to make sure that there weren't any landslides in our path that would prevent us from taking the main route. But eventually we made our way to our first campsite, which in the left photo, if you can see the tiny little blue, orange, and yellow tents in front of the beautiful Himalayan background.
And then this was about day 4 of hiking, so we had already left our campsite. We ended up passing through a village called Mutnath. This village is likely one of the more popular and well-known villages out of the ones that we went through. And this is because a lot of people from India and a lot of people from Nepal come to this location to come to the Sri Mukhtinath temple. This temple is... you have to go up the elevation to the village and then go up even more staircases, and just to reach 108 fountains and 2 pools. And what they do is they go under these and they walk through the 108 fountains and they go into the pools, and it's to, based on their beliefs, cleanse them of their sins. And behind me is a clip of us, we walked through the 108 fountains, and that's the only thing we did do. And this clip is just a brief of us going into it. And while we were going under, it was really cold water. And Madara and Marshall did the alternative where you put your hand under the water and just pour it over your head, which you'll see at the very end. This village was very different than the rest of the villages we went to, mainly because it was built, it's starting to be more developed towards being a touristic location to appeal to the people showing up there from like the cities or from the people of India. And with that, it's when we went through, there was a bunch of construction, there were holes in the wall. Oh, okay. There was holes on the road, and a lot of newer construction that was kind of friction against the old buildings, and we actually did a small like notebook drawing, which those notebooks will be in the other room, of those like frictions comparing. And with the Muktanath development, it's important to note that roads were also developed towards there specifically so people had easier things. In the previous slide, on the very bottom photo, there was people being carried, and that's called a palanquin. And it's for people pay to get carried just due to the fact that they aren't used to the altitudes. And so that becomes like more modern of like what they do now, and they also do buses. But it kind of goes against, it conflicts with the traditional way of going all the way by foot, which kind of is an interesting little fact. Yeah.
And then from Muktinath, we continued our trek towards our second campsite, which overlooked the Muktinath Valley. And it was really cool to see all the places in the valley we had already visited and all the villages that were to come. But we did specifically pick the campsites because they were in proximity to water for both ourselves and the horses.
So this is one of my favorite drawings I did in Nepal. This was in Kakbeni, one of the last villages we visited. And in that village, we stayed at a place called Yakdonald's, which is an imitation of McDonald's because they sell the Happy Meal with yak burger, which was something fun for us to experience, I guess. But on the other side or note, Kakbeni was hit by a flood due to climate change recently. And in this drawing, you see a monastery that was in Kakbeni, and at the bottom, you see all the sediment from the river that took over almost the entire first floor of the monastery and is being reconstructed. And why I chose this drawing and to tell you about it was because you see the contrast of a building and how fragile they are and how the weather around us and in this sense, climate change can affect anyone at any time.
The last two villages that we visited were called Falyak and Dagarzong, and there we noticed some of these patterns that we've been noticing throughout the whole trek, such as outmigration of young people, empty fields due to this outmigration, a lot of apple trees. So then we finished our trek by going back to Lubra full circle, and there we just sat down and connected all the topics that we learned about, and we talked about some of our learning outcome topics. So we learned that climate change is immediately changing the landscape, and people are actively adapting to it in Nepal. We learned that the people and architecture are interacted with different landscapes, that we learned more about like cultural in religion, Buddhism and Hinduism, and culture living in our guest houses. And we also learned more about diverse groups of people all in one country, and it opened our eyes to different human experiences. And we saw how climate change is interconnected with everything, and it's changing the way that it's interacting between land and the people.
Like we mentioned earlier, we had 3 amazing seniors join us on the trip, and this is a short video of Marshall, one of our seniors, telling you what were his main takeaways from the abroad.
Hello everyone. One takeaway that I had from the Nepal abroad was advance that quickly, you tend to have positive ramifications and negative ramifications depending on who you are. So let's say you build a road connecting one market to another, and then maybe people along that road experience inconveniences due to not being able to compete in those markets, or in a physically environmental way where those roads are not so stable and they might promote erosion. Which leads me to my last point of how this information is helping me in my post-grad, where some developments we have where I work now are jumping the gun a little bit, and we need to kind of step back and think about the ramifications of all of those. Hello everyone. One takeaway that I had from the Nepal abroad.
Okay, now we just want to take this time and give some gratitude for everyone who helped us on our trek and our abroad. So our resident counselor, Jenna Fisher, our wonderful host families for taking us in, the Three Sisters Adventure Trekking Guide, of course, the Abroad Office, Allison Terry, Mary Jane Hoff, Stephanie Loveseth, and finally our professors, Dr. Nick Johnson and Dane Carlson.
And these are the little answers of Dara's water bottle. Again, they were a little difficult.
So now we have some time for some Q&A, some questions that we're going to be more than happy to answer.
When you have a question, please make sure to hold the microphone up to your mouth so that everybody is able to hear you. And the microphone is already on, so you don't need to worry about fiddling with it. Just hold it up and speak.
Thanks, Dane. Thanks, you guys. That was awesome. I have just a really simple question. There were these large twirling cylinders. Were they metal? What is the purpose of those? Is that a prayer of some kind, or I was just curious.
So I don't know exactly what they say. I do know it got explained to us that every time you walk past a monastery or a temple, you had to go from the right to the left, and every time it has a prayer inside, a Buddhist prayer, and every time you flip it or turn it around, it multiplies your prayers. So that's why you go around like every single one, because you're like multiplying your prayers rather than just like sitting down and praying. You go around. I don't know exactly what prayer it is and what they say, but it's supposed to multiply what your intentions.
What was the most touching interpersonal cultural experience that you had? Multiple people can share if they're different.
Yeah, for me, the video of us playing soccer with the girls, I really loved that. I thought it was a great way to connect with people that are not from your own culture. We didn't speak the language, but it felt like we had this human connection that even though we didn't understand what they were saying, we still like laughed with each other, we still like smiled with each other, and just playing a sport, doing like something that you would normally do on a regular basis, and somebody else on the other side of the world is also doing the same. It kind of brought up this feeling in me of like a shared humanity between all of us.
While we were in Lubra at our homestay, the family we were staying with, their daughter, who was about 7, she was turning 7, had a birthday party. And so to experience a small little birthday party in another country was really meaningful, and it felt like very personal. And they shared some of their cake with us, and drinks, and it was just really sweet that they included us in that. And this daughter of theirs, she attends a boarding school near the village, and so she mostly just sees her family on weekends, and those kids sometimes start boarding at 5 or 6 years old.
And then while we were in Pokhara, we stayed at the Three Sisters guest house. And I unfortunately became ill for one of the days, so I missed the group activities. But Nikki, one of the owners, went back to our house and made me soup and brought it to me while I was in the guest house. And that was just something I wasn't expecting, but it was really kind. It made me feel much better.
I'm sure you all were well prepared for this journey, but was there something that really surprised you that you weren't expecting?
I was shocked at how nice people were. It was, I don't know why, but it was so nice to just come to a different country and seeing their enthusiasm and just how loving and welcoming they were. And like Madara and we've been saying, like we didn't speak their language, but even like that, like just by giving us food or like welcoming or like giving us a hug, like all those small details like meant a lot, and I was just not expecting that. Yeah.
So while you were there, did you get a sense of a cohesive plan moving forward from, let's say, NGOs, from the central government versus regional versus the villages? Were the villagers in communication with local other villages, or was there any sense of the crisis on their part? Were they aware of, how much was that communicated to you during your time there?
I can start with that. Well, we met with multiple foundations like ACAP, which is the Annapurna Conservation Area, and they're kind of in charge of regulating the trekking and everything that goes on in the region of Mustang, which is where ACAP is, as well as the NIDI Foundation, who works on climate crisis and adaptations. We met with the Gaon Palika of Mustang, which is essentially, in our terms, a mayor. But it is very difficult to provide aid to Lubra specifically, just because of their location. And but there's not really, someone can jump in, but there wasn't really like a set plan in place while we were there. It's a really tough situation that they're in.
Yeah, we discussed in the presentation, the higher levels of government and the lower levels of government, it's very difficult for both levels of government to communicate with each other, and the villagers are on the lower end of that, and it makes it even tougher for them to access aid or get money from the government. And also we did get a sense that the villagers were well aware of climate change going on. For example, we did talk with a herder, and his herd has been experiencing difficulties getting water because there has been no rainfall or snowfall in the area for almost 3 years. And snowfall is the major source of water in the Himalayas because the melt trickles down the mountains, and that's how they get water for their herds from the streams.
Something a professor just said in a class this week that really resonated with me was that she notices that freshmen often come and really want straightforward answers in college, and upperclassmen are more comfortable with ambiguous answers and the complexities in life. And so something we learned in Nepal was how complex the world is, and when you're like the semester before, when you're studying a map, it just seems so simple. There's road here, it's perfect. But when you go there and you see that the road is in the direct conflict with where rivers are flooding, you start to see the problems. And so when we talked with one of the NGOs, they were touting about all the trees they've planted, but then we started to learn sometimes they plant the trees and then they don't maintain them and water them, so then they start dying. And so I think examples like that showed us that you sometimes have to question things more than you do.
Were there any big key takeaways from the culture that you want to integrate into your lives now?
I think one big thing that I appreciated from living in rural Nepal for 4 weeks was their sense of community. I felt like even though they were going through very tough challenges, they worked together on like projects and adapting to the situation. And also, we also felt this like love from everybody, even though we were strangers. We were accepted into their homes, taught how to make Nepali food. We shared a lot of jokes, laughter, and I feel like having that sense of community and being able to like open up for strangers, that's something I would take forward from being in Nepal.
Also, based on that, just super quick, just have an open mind to everything, because you never know who you're gonna connect and how you're gonna connect with that person. And in Nepal, we connected with so many people through so many different ways, but it was because they were open, like opening their home to us, and we were opening our minds. I don't know how to say it, but to them and their culture, and that's where you made that connection.
Did you get to hear much of the story of the three sisters and how they started their company as women in Nepal long ago? Did you get to hear many stories from them?
Yeah, so the Three Sisters Trekking Company was started in the late 1990s, and what's been neat about that is this was our 25th year, Principia's 25th year of working with them, and so we were given a plaque by them, which was very sweet, and we had dinner with them at the very end of the trip. But they're, the Three Sisters are like actually three sisters who started this company, and they said that their dad really supported their education, which was pretty uncommon in the late 1990s. They felt lucky that their dad supported their education that much and helped them to start this business in Pokhara, and they started it in Pokhara, which gave them more entrepreneurial opportunities, and they've gotten recognition from other companies too, and I think people see that they've been able to hire so many people and create so many job opportunities that it's caught on well, and they have a good reputation.
They also originally lived in India, and they kind of made the decision to move to Nepal, not knowing very much, but they're huge activists in women working in Nepal, so that's one of their big beliefs, and they employ a lot of women in their company.
Thank you all so much for your presentation. This looks like an amazing place to go. And I actually just have a question about how, when you came back, was there anything that you saw differently? Like before, like when you were here or home or whatever, and now that you're back, what is one way that you see your environment differently now? Because I know a lot of you said, oh yeah, we all have different perspectives, but I'm sure this must have given you something new.
One thing that I see differently now is a sense of like the lack of boundaries. Before I went to Nepal, there's like, you have like your river, you have the river out there, you have the road, but really something we learned is that there's really no boundary between those, as it's always interchanging and humans are affecting it and we're impacted by it, and it's just a connection between there.
Also, because our abroad was so drawing focused, you kind of underestimate how much you can observe in such a little time when you draw it. Like, we had our big drawings, yeah, but we also brought along small sketchbooks that we would spend 10 seconds to a minute to a few minutes drawing little things that we observed. And so that's something you kind of miss out when you're not drawing. So we just kind of like going back to my day-to-day life, just observing more and finding like the little small details and things.
You all talked a little bit about the social classes in Nepal. Did you guys see a big difference in how someone in a lower social class adapted to climate change than someone in a higher social class?
One of the lower social class people we met was a yak herder, and he told us a story of how he lives like separated from the village, and his access to water is restricted. So kind of a difference between both citizens of the village and the yak herder who is low caste is that if there was to be a climate emergency or a disaster, he wouldn't have access to water, but the people in the village would. So his identity as a lower caste person kind of kept him at a higher risk than people in the village who were at a much higher level in society.
With that, I think we're going to end our question section, but we do have a Nepali food reception in Leonard Hall, along with all of our drawings that we did, both big and our small sketchbooks, if you would like to flip through them in Leonard Hall. Thank you.